Welcome back, fight fans. This video is brought to you by AB Combat. There's nothing quite like a heated rivalry to really amp up the stakes when fight night comes around, and for this video, we're going to take a look at the top 10 grudge matches in UFC history. Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington. Colby Covington is a pretty easy guy to pick a fight with, and over the years, several of his fellow welterweights, and even fighters from other divisions, have found themselves at odds with Chaos. Perhaps the most high-profile feud of his career, however, came when he took on Kamaru Usman for the first time. With the welterweight title on the line, these two guys clashed instantly in the media, and when the action kicked off in the cage, things did not simmer down, not one bit. This was a high-octane thriller, a striking matchup between two elite wrestlers that was an instant Fight of the Year contender. Usman was the one to get his hand raised by 5th round TKO, but Colby left it all in the octagon that night. Quinton Jackson versus Rashid Evans. The Ultimate Fighter is a great way to really get to know your opponent, or in this case, to spend days after days poking and prodding at them. And for Rampage Jackson and Rashid Evans, their rivalry gave us some of the funniest moments in the history of TUF as these two larger-than-life characters tried to get one over on the other. The fight itself was largely a dominant showing from Rashid after he tagged Jackson early and proceeded to work his wrestling game. Rampage hurt Evans in the last round, but it wasn't enough to get the job done. These two guys did eventually become friends, but we'll always have the memories. Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw. There's just something especially nasty about a pair of former teammates who became enemies. And in the case of Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw, it wasn't just fighter versus fighter. No, this was a feud that engulfed the entirety of Team Alpha Male, as Cody, Faber, and their whole team felt betrayed by TJ's decision to pack up and leave after winning a world title. Naturally, the UFC moved to set up a fight between these two, and boy did it deliver. Not only was the build-up all kinds of personal, but the fight itself was riveting. Both men got dropped and nearly finished, but it was Dillashaw's slick offense that saw him TKO Cody in round 2. Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal. Although Colby Covington entry in yet another pair of former teammates whose relationship turned nasty. After spending years in each other's corner, Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal had a major falling out, eventually signing on the dotted line to fight in 2022. Colby won the fight in convincing fashion, but the real headline would not happen until after the bout. Some people thought the beef was faked, a pro wrestling work designed to bump up the pay-per-view numbers. Well, all that talk was put to bed after Colby was attacked and sucker punched by Jorge outside of a Miami restaurant after the fight. This led to an entire legal saga between the two, which is going on until this day. Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg II. It's Dana White's favorite fighter of all time, and for our money, it's one of the Octagon's greatest revenge tales. Matt Hughes and Frank Trigg did not like each other at all after their first fight, but their rematch was something entirely different. Trigg landed a hard low blow to Hughes that totally swung the fight in his favor. After taking top position and nearly finishing the fight with a rear naked choke, Trigg was stunned when Hughes snapped back to life, shrugging him off his back and eventually lifting him off the mat before running across the cage and slamming him to the canvas. Hughes then began raining down with ground and pound for locking in a choke of his own. The perfect revenge story. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen. All that trash talk from Chael Sonnen seemed like unnecessary padding for what should have been a run-of-the-mill fight for Anderson Silva. But when the cage doors closed, Chael backed up every word, putting a pace on the Brazilian that left the entire MMA world stunned. It all seemed like empty noise from Chael on the mic, but here he was, just minutes away from shocking the world. Unfortunately for him, Anderson proved his championship medal by locking onto a fight-ending triangle choke to force the tap. One of the all-time great grudge matches and UFC title fights.
There's the right hand. That's a tap. Unbelievable!
Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. This fight took so long to actually happen that many started to lose hope. First, they were friends and training partners, but then the tension became too great to ignore. All of a sudden, the two biggest stars in the promotion were gunning for one another. And while their second fighter was the bigger success at the box office, that first fight had something special to it. Chuck Liddell's insane power and combo work proved to be Tito's undoing in both fights, but this was the MMA rivalry by which all others were judged. Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. It's funny to think that this pairing very nearly didn't happen. If Conor McGregor had, in fact, fought Rafael dos Anjos, who knows where Nate Diaz would have ended up. Both matchups were true classics, and while the first was the real shocker of the two, the second fight came built with this already evolved rivalry at the fore. Fight week was totally insane, and when the time came to actually throw down, their rematch delivered on every front. A narrow unanimous decision win for the Irishman, but a star-making saga for Stockton's Nate Diaz. Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones. As far as personality clashes go, they don't come much more extreme than Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier. These two men were just total polar opposites of each other, and you could just tell that they hated every second they had to spend in each other's presence. And while their first meeting certainly had some real highlights in its build-up, their rematch was a truly riveting fight. DC was even having some solid success in there, showing a bit of the swagger and confidence he had picked up since Fight 1. But when Jones found his gap, boy did he exploit it, faking low and going high with a massive head kick, and that finishing sequence, a scene of total brutality. Yeah, this was a mean rivalry that served up one hell of a fight. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. And finally, we come to the big one, the feud that totally ripped up the rulebook on what you can and cannot say to another fighter. Lines relating to race, family, religion, and more were crossed like they were nothing. And even after Khabib Nurmagomedov managed to definitively shut down Conor McGregor in the cage, he lost control of himself and tried to get one over on Conor's team as well. Not only was this the most volatile rivalry in MMA history, but everything that took place between these two guys took place on the biggest and most watched event in UFC history, a blockbuster pairing that we may never see the equal of. Thanks for watching, fight fans. We'll be back soon.